I I like to create things. I used to, and I still do on occasion, draw and paint. But I also, I really like history, and I really enjoy stories of all sorts, and especially horror and the supernatural. But um, I, I also like to work with my hands, and I like to do research, and so honestly, I don't have enough time to do all of them to my satisfaction, and I stumbled upon this hobby which seemed to, in layers, bring all of those things together in one place. And so that's how I guess I got interested in it in the first place, because it allows me, I'm a very detail-oriented person, and so it certainly allows me to express that. I really enjoy a sense of realism when it comes to artwork, and so I'm a pretty harsh self-critic, and so when I look at something I do and I think that I don't buy it, I don't believe it. Then I either continue to do it or I start over until I do, that kind of thing. So anyway, it seems to hit on a lot of areas that satisfy me artistically, I guess. I look back on this, and when I was a little kid, my dad was really into trains, and he had an amazing train platform. At least I thought so when I was a kid. But then as I grew up, or as I got a little older, I kept noticing things about his train platform that I would think to myself, and sometimes I would ask him, Dad, why don't you make that look more realistic? And sometimes he would get annoyed with me, and sometimes he would actually answer the question. Anyway, so I saw that trend happening there, but the cemetery itself, I'm not. I guess it was my love of horror stories, from Gothic horror to even if you jump into the nonfiction of the interesting aspects of how people buried the dead, from the Bronze Age up through time, and then what I started to learn is how all interconnected that sort of thing really was. We think about it so separately, but if we found the right spot in a very real way, we could dig down vertically and find layers and layers of human history. And so that fascinated me. So I kind of translated that into, maybe if I make a graveyard that represents so much of human history, and that which we are afraid of, and that which we use to fight those fears, whether that be our philosophies, our religions, our beliefs, then we kind of have this place of interaction. So I started referring to it as, instead of a cemetery, a necropolis. And because basically what I saw blessings and curses competing for space, for energy, for whatever it is you want to call it. But here in this place, all of those things seem to dominate. And so then, of course, that opens us wide up to folklore and mythology, and like I said, religion and history in one place. And then from there I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this, So as soon as I started thinking about it that way. Okay, so if we're starting down here on this end of the board, the idea was to make this look and feel more overgrown, more ancient, more abandoned than other parts of it. So, for example, you might take notice of this here, along here, even over here, and up closer. I don't know if the camera's there, but all of these are various barrow mounds, and obviously, in a barrow mound, it's a way to bury the dead. But also, in addition to that, we have, let's see, if you look at this structure here, at a glance, it just looks like rock, but it also there's an evidence of having it been worked as the stone has been worked, not just a natural feature. And so it's an ancient fortress, but underneath that, of course, there's a burial aspect. And over the years, as populations come in and go, and hundreds of years are passing by, it's not like they're just completely abandoned. They just continue to use them for their own purposes. And then so we keep on moving here, and we have the ruins of a tower, but it's a very different sort than this one. And so it's just an extension of time passing, but all the while, of course, burying the dead. And in fact, if you remove this idol here, then there's stairs going down, and it continues to suggest subterranean levels. Anyhow, one of my favorite things to do is, because I'm still a little kid at heart, is basically get down at eye level and picture myself walking through the thing that I create. And I can lose myself for probably longer than I care to admit when I do stuff like that. So as we continue to move across the board, maybe we'll call this over top of the stream. Here I have a peat bog, which in and of itself is indicative of an area that has been underwater at some point, still usually low-lying, continues to be wet, but it was often a great place to bury the dead because the earth was very pliable. But then as you get layers and layers of, quite honestly, dead bodies, we have a lot of nitrogen, so growth occurs, and so then there's all this unusual growth that isn't actually happening anywhere else on the board. So that's that representation there. So as we move up into here, it gets closer to what I just refer to as Gothic horror. But what we're really talking about is a time period when tombstones above the ground, as we often think of them and as we see them as we drive along, they weren't always a thing. Somewhere in the late Middle Ages, tombstones began to show up, mausoleums, and all of them for various reasons: cultural, personal, monetary, and so forth. So I just kind of eclectically put that together in terms of, well, here's this ruined tower. It's called a rookery. At one point in my mind in the story, monks used to live here, to populate this, but it fell into ruin for who knows what reason. That's a story in and of itself. But then later on, the abbey was built here, and again, years pass, and that falls into ruin. But collectively, if we step back and really take a look at it, there are representations of different aspects of how we put our loved ones and not so loved ones to rest, or in this case, unrest, because, well, it's supernatural, and so we want to have that supernatural element. For example, if I can turn your attention over here, I specifically built this part. It's newer than any other part of the cemetery, because an aristocrat who did not want to share space in the estate cemetery with anyone else wanted to build his own for his own family. But then, of course, there's a story of how things went awry, and the short of it is, basically, that's where a vampire lives, or unlives, as the case may be. And so it has its own feel to it. It's a little bit different than the rest in one way or another, and it sticks out. But then even out here, we have tombstones that are in ruin and vine covered, and the idea is to have them feel unwanted and a place that you don't want to be. I took that idea from Neil Gaiman, and he talks about in every cemetery there's a ghoul gate, a place where ghouls enter and leave a cemetery to find and feast upon flesh and of the living, and you know, bring them into the ghoul families. So anyway, I tried to bring as much into it as possible in a seamless fashion. So when you look back on it, or when you step back from it, it's sort of a representation of history, story, horror, and creativity, so that anybody who looks at it, my hope is that as their mind wanders through the details of the cemetery, that they create their own stories